How will we power our future? Can we create a healthy and clean economy? Climate One at the Commonwealth Club is at the forefront of the global debate about energy, economy, and the environment. Bringing together the brightest and most provocative leaders of our time, Climate One is the place where big ideas get heard. With thoughtful and insightful discussions on policy, business, science, and culture, Climate One founder Greg Dalton gets to the heart of the matter. It's our future. It's time to come together.
This week on Climate One, Elon Musk is the genius behind Tesla, SpaceX, and Hyperloop. We're joined by Ashlee Vance, who wrote the preeminent biography of the eccentric entrepreneur.
He's the most intense human being that I've ever met.
He takes us inside the life of the man who is changing the world. We're talking Elon Musk and Tesla. Climate One starts now. So Ashlee, tell us about Elon Musk as a child. He wrote to you in an email that childhood was misery for him. What was his childhood like?
I mean, it was very dramatic. It's one of the things when I was doing the book that there had not been a ton written about in the past. He had talked about having a difficult childhood here and there, but I went back and I found tons of kids that he went to school with and his teachers and talked to his family and all that. So, the basics are that he was born in South Africa in Pretoria. His father was a pretty well-to-do mechanical engineer, and his mom was a former model who had become kind of a homemaker. And when Elon was growing up, he was not like people think of him today at all. He was kind of this loner off in the corner during school who'd be reading his books and kind of doing his own thing. The culture at the time was in South Africa, was very athletic, and it was all about sports, and it was very macho, and Elon was sort of the opposite of all this stuff. And so he would either get left alone or he'd be picked on. He was bullied quite badly, especially around sort of 8th or 9th grade. At one point, he got kicked down a flight of stairs and pummeled after that, and he spent about a week in hospital as a result from that. And then, so he's kind of this outcast at school, and at home things were better. I mean, obviously his family, he's a bit of a strange kid. He was like a know-it-all, and so at school he was not really liked. There were not kids who were coming home with him, but his family was very kind to him, except for his father, who he had a very difficult relationship with as well. And so I mean, you can kind of play armchair psychologist and see that all throughout his growing up, this is a kid who's getting beat on at school. He has this tough relationship with his dad, and so you could see that this is a guy who wants to prove himself to the world and show everyone that he was this special guy.
And you had amazing access. You had some email exchanges with his father. You talked to his, members of his family. And so tell us about the access that you had that other people haven't had and how you got it.
Yeah. There's kind of two segments. I'll sort of tell the story how I got into this. I was not, there's so many Elon Musk fanboys now. I was not an Elon Musk kind of acolyte at all when I started this project in 2012. He had sort of struck me as this guy who was always promising the world. He had Tesla and SpaceX, but they never actually seemed to be getting anywhere. And then in 2012, a lot of stuff changed. SpaceX docked. They had a capsule dock with the International Space Station. Tesla came out with the Model S sedan. Solar City was filing to go public, and so I thought, this guy who's really he's hitting his stride. I mean, this guy who's been talking this big game is delivering in a way that sort of nobody in history has. So I did a cover story on him for Business Week magazine, and I went to SpaceX, and I just couldn't believe that there was this rocket factory sitting in the middle of Los Angeles, and Elon was a much more interesting and sort of authentic guy than I had expected, and so I kind of got sucked in and decided to do this book. So after the cover story came out, I told Elon, my intentions to go do this book, and he told me no, he was not going to help me at all. He said a few people had asked him in the past, and he'd turned them all down. And so then I went to New York, and I sold the book, and I thought that would sort of force Elon's hand, and so I came back and had another meeting with him, and he was pretty polite through this whole process, but we did that, and he's like, no, I'm not going to help you. Again, we had like an hour-long meeting, and so I had this moment where I just decided to keep going anyway, and so I spent about 18 months interviewing 200 or so people. And Elon was actually, I thought he could be sort of adversarial, but I started very far away. People who had worked at Tesla and quit, and SpaceX who had quit, and then I would get closer and closer into Elon's circle friends, and I would get to the family, and they would all go back to him and ask if they should talk to me, and Elon told them all to go ahead and talk to me. So that part kind of kept things going. And then one day I was at my house. It was about 18 months into the project, and Elon Musk appeared on my caller ID, and I picked up the phone. He said, "Look, I've had so many people call me about this freaking book. I'm ready to let's talk about it. Here's my idea. I think you should let me read the book before it's published, and I'll put footnotes in it to correct everything that you've gotten wrong." And I was like, at least we're sort of talking now. So then we ended up having this big dinner where we hashed things out, and I said, "Look, as a journalist, you can't read the book before it's published, but I would really like you to do interviews for it." And he agreed to. I had this big 45-minute speech, and I was like 5 minutes into it, and he just goes, "Fine, I'll do it."
So you wore him down.
Yeah.
So he left South Africa, came to Montreal in 1988, kind of escaping this unhappy, oppressive childhood, lands in Montreal, looking for an uncle. This is 1988, pre-cell phone. So tell us how he lands there.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's 17 years old. He more or less runs away from home. I mean, he told his parents what he was going to do, and they told him, "We don't want you to go to Canada," but he just left anyway. And he'd always kind of pined, he was into technology as a kid, and he'd always heard about Silicon Valley, and this was kind of his goal was to get to Silicon Valley, but he couldn't get to the United States really, and half of his family has this Canadian heritage, and so he finds his way into Canada. He arrives with $100 in his pocket. He had, like you mentioned, the uncle. He thought he was going to stay with this guy, but during the time it took Elon to get to Canada, he had missed all these letters where the uncle had said, "I'm gone. I've gone on some vacation," or something like that. And so Elon goes to a cousin's farm where he's like tending the turnips and doing all this stuff. He ends up working in like a boiler maker where he would have to go in and like scoop out all this steaming hot goop in a hazmat suit, and he kind of does that for about a year and then ends up getting into university.
And then he goes to Penn, comes to Silicon Valley, and the PayPal mafia boss is a chapter in the book, and that really is the foundation of his wealth and power in Silicon Valley. So tell us him as the role of that PayPal mafia boss.
Yeah, well, so he'd come to the Valley, and he had a startup beforehand called Zip2, and he had made a fair bit of money from it. I think he came out of that with about $30 million. They sold the company for $300 million. He gets this $30 million, and I think it's this very Elon moment. He buys a fancy car, a McLaren, and he kind of buys a slightly nicer apartment, but that's kind of like 2 of the 30 million, and then he takes all of the rest and pours it into his next company at a time when people were falling all over themselves to give him money, but he wanted to control everything. And so, before PayPal was PayPal, Elon had this company called X.com, and it was his vision. This is kind of, what year is this? I mean, this is like 2004-ish. No. This is like 1998, 1999, and he has this vision of, really the world's first online bank where you would do your banking, you would have all your investments, you would do everything through this online system. And this is at a time when people aren't even really comfy using their credit cards to pay for things online. And this company ends up becoming PayPal, and it's a very formative experience for Elon. At both of his first two companies, he was a guy who wanted to be CEO and wanted to be in control, but he was a terrible manager of people. He had been this loner back in the day. He had never, like he says, been on a team. He had never really had to participate with people in anything. He was still a know-it-all, so he would be in these meetings and he would lay into people where they would propose something, and then in front of the whole room of people, he would tell them all the reasons they were wrong in very clear terms and really lay into them. And so, at Zip2, his first company, and PayPal, he ends up getting thrown out as CEO. There's, even though he's the majority shareholder, there's essentially coups at both companies to push him out. And so I think this has had a really lasting effect on him, where you see with Tesla and SpaceX that he will never relinquish control of the companies and sort of allow this to happen again.
2008, both of his companies are at the brink of death. What happens?
Well, it's amazing. I mean, you guys have to, it's even, while I was doing the book, I mean, it's hard to remember exactly what 2008 was like, but it's the middle of the financial crisis. You have real, actual car companies that are going bankrupt, and here's this guy who has an electric car company that can barely make its cars, and he's asking for more money. It sort of makes no sense. He's got a rocket company that's had its first 3 rockets blow up, and he has enough money left for one more rocket. That's it. So after Elon sold PayPal, he had about $300 million, and in this moment, he's burned through everything. So I do give him credit for his commitment to all this stuff. And so 2008 is coming to an end. Tesla is absolutely going bankrupt. There's people at the company, the upper management, they're paying lower people's salaries out of their own pocket. Elon's jet has been parked. He's taking Southwest back and forth between Los Angeles and Silicon Valley, between the two companies. And he does this kind of crazy thing. So at Tesla, it's around December. Nobody is willing to put more money into the company. There's one investor who's looking to basically bankrupt the whole thing and sell it for parts and throw Elon out. So Elon threatens all the VCs that he's going to take a loan from SpaceX, which has never flown its rocket successfully yet, and he's going to take a loan from SpaceX and fund a new round in Tesla all by himself. And so it was genius, because even in the middle of 2008, the greed of all the venture capitalists got the better of them, and nobody wanted to miss out on this round and be left behind. And so even though Elon possibly could have raised the money, but probably not, the VCs all jump in, and so they fund one more round of Tesla. It gets its car going finally after all these years of delays. It's making sales, and then SpaceX's last and final rocket launch is a success, and that triggers this enormous NASA contract. And so in the middle of all this, Elon's having nightmares. I talked to his second wife, Tallulah Riley. He used to just wake up screaming in the middle of the night and be he used to say he was climbing up her, chasing after something. And then literally on kind of Christmas Day, all this stuff gets sorted out, and the rest is history.
Wow, quite impressive. Some angels on his side bluffing down the Silicon Valley VCs. There's another dramatic moment where Tesla's about to be acquired by Google.
Yeah. So this was a thing that I broke in the book. So the Model S had come out, and I think it was all, even from the very early days, it was doing much better, I think, than most people had thought. It was receiving pretty good reviews from Detroit, from the auto press, I should say, which had tended to sort of hate Tesla more or less, and so it's doing well. The sales are going along okay. This happens for about a quarter, and then there's this weird moment where people are reading the reviews about the car online on these forums, and people are talking about glitches in the car, and so even fans of the company and customers that wanted to buy the car are doing the thing where they say, I'm going to put off my purchase till they work all these kinks out. Mm-hmm. And so everybody's kind of delaying things. And this creates a huge problem where, the Tesla factory is just idle and they're chewing through money at this really alarming rate. And even though this car, after all these years, is kind of a success, it's all about to get undone because they're gonna go bankrupt. And so Elon's very close with Larry Page and Sergey Brin, and he kind of makes this desperation phone call, and they're getting really close to Elon. They say it's like a handshake deal where Google has agreed to acquire Tesla.
For about $6 billion.
Yeah. He is the most intense human being that I've ever met. That was clear to me. I mean, at Business Week, the New York Times, I've written about just about every CEO in Silicon Valley, and it's not just like a type A personality. It's which there's lots of. There's some other level to him where he's almost possessed. I mean, I think people hear him talk about, and this is not like a fanboy thing. I mean, it's like kind of scary. Like it can be great and it can be horrifying at the same time. He's very driven, he's very logical. And so in his head, once he flipped this switch, that this is what he's gonna do, basically every moment that he is not pursuing that goal at kind of maximum force is just wasted time. I mean, he's like the most logical person I've ever met as well. And so, it's a 1 or a 0, and for him, this is what he's gonna do.
And tell me about his climate passion. He's very passionate about getting away from fossil fuels. This is Climate One. That's a part of it. So where does that come from, and how did you encounter that in writing about Elon Musk?
He just has the strangest form of empathy, I think, of anyone that I've met as well. There's people who worked for him for like 12 years, and he might know nothing about their family. He certainly doesn't care what their mood is that day. He just doesn't care about any of those details. I spent many hours with him. He never once asked me, like, do I have a family? He never asked me like a single question about me. So he's not really interested in individual people. But when we would talk about Mars, when we would talk about the climate, there were at least 3 or 4 times where he like was literally in tears, and it's this very strange like empathy for the human species, and it's part of this logical mind of his. I mean, I think he identifies that there's a problem and it needs to be solved, and other people aren't doing that much about it, and so he's like, why would you not go pursue this? It's the same thing. It is the same thing with Mars. I mean, part of it is like an escape plan if the climate goes horribly wrong on Earth, but the other part of it is just this thing. It's like, the human species may be wiped out. Why isn't, if you can do something about that, you should. Nobody else seems to be doing it. I'm going to do it. But he really would just break down in tears when he would talk about these things. This is like what he actually cares about.
Coming up next on Climate One, Reuters journalist Peter Henderson joins the show. He'll discuss Elon Musk's big gamble on the Model 3. We're joined now by Peter Henderson, West Coast Deputy Bureau Chief of Thomson Reuters, where he spearheads Silicon Valley coverage of autonomous cars and broader technology stories. Please welcome him to Climate One. Thank you. So Peter, welcome. This is a make or break moment for Tesla, a big moment for the automobile industry. So what's at stake with the Model 3, this $35,000 or so car? I've been hearing about hundreds of thousands of people put a reservation down. What's at stake with the Model 3?
Well, as Ashlee said, if you think about it from Musk's point of view, where he's trying to change the world, then it's important because he has these luxury cars that have been doing well, and now he's taking that first step towards a mass market vehicle. $35,000 is about the average price of a car in America now. So if he's successful, you'll be getting average people going on this ride, which he thinks will take you to a clean future. From a business perspective, it's a huge deal because Tesla sold about 230,000 cars so far. Next year, it plans to sell twice as much of that, 500,000. So I think production in 1 year will go up like 6-fold, he expects. He's said himself that one kind of key question is whether he can get new people to buy and to buy and not think that they're getting a better version of the luxury car. So he's a bit worried about cannibalization. He needs to bring new people in, not get the old people buying the new, cheaper car.
And what record does Musk have in terms of his actual projections? He makes lots of projections. What's his batting average, Peter Henderson, in terms of actually delivering on the numbers? Because he's a bit of a master at announcing a couple of shiny objects. And just as the first shiny object's supposed to be delivered, he announces shiny object number 3 and 4 to kind of get our attention.
Well, I think it's a pretty poor record in terms of delivering exactly on time. Last year in May, he said that they would make as many as 200,000 Model 3s this year. So if he does 20,000 in December with a few before that, it's a bit more than a tenth. And I think that's the type of thing that has a lot of investors and analysts worried about whether, even if he can create a great car, that it's kind of a going concern in his business, that he can get them out with enough volume to kind of pay back the enormous debts that they've built up so far.
Tesla has a lead over all these other car makers, and the quicker it can sort of knock out these cars, the closer it is to this sort of iPhone moment where they have the shiny object that everybody wants, and the older incumbent companies are kind of struggling not only to match Tesla's electric car maker, but to match, the software inside of the car, which often gets overlooked and is a huge problem, I think, for the traditional automakers to match. And so, the more he can hit that stride, the better for Tesla.
Tell us about why auto dealers like to push gasoline more than electric.
First of all, they know it, and it's a lot easier to sell something that you know. Secondly, there are no auto dealers for Tesla. Tesla runs its own showrooms, sells things, so these kind of big, important local businesses that are built from working with Detroit and other companies just don't exist for Tesla. And they're using their local clout in some areas to stop Tesla from selling.
Yeah, and then, the electric cars tend to need a lot less servicing,
Yeah.
The internal combustion engine is full of all these moving parts. You have to get oil changes, all these things. Tesla,
And that's where the dealers make their money,
that's
not
where they
on
make their
sales.
money, right? And so Tesla has this little motor. Tesla, unfortunately, hasn't been the best about manufacturing cars, and so they still do have to get service. But you could see a world where a Ford or a GM or a Mercedes is building these things at super high quality, and like I've got a couple friends who own a Tesla. They never go to a gas station, they never go to the dealer. It's just in their garage and taking them where they want to go. And so it's a huge revenue loss for the dealerships.
Let's go to our audience questions. Welcome to Climate One.
I'm John Thomas from the Mad Hedge Fund Trader. I've been following Tesla for about 12 years now. Been recommending it to my clients since it was $16.50. I bought it after it dumped from the IPO 45%. Since then, I've been fighting a nonstop battle with Wall Street that this thing is a liberal conspiracy, is a cult, is a rich man's toy, exists purely to harvest government subsidies. My big question is, when will Tesla actually make real money on a non-accounting trick basis?
Wow, wouldn't we all like to know?
Yeah. They've lost a couple $2 billion so far. They lose money on each car. Ashlee Vance?
Well, the Model 3 has to be profitable. It looks like it's not going to be out of the gate, and that they have to get to volume in order for it to be profitable. It becomes difficult to see how Tesla is a going concern. If they cannot make the Model 3 profitable, they have enormous problems. You could see, in a worst case scenario, somebody coming in to acquire them or something like that. But that's it. And then if the Model 3 does well and they keep selling I don't even think they have to sell the Model S and the Model X at the same rate that they are now, but they can still sort of keep selling those. Tesla is going to make a lot of short sellers, very, very sad.
Donald Robertson. SpaceX is famously a vertically integrated company, a business model that hasn't been popular in the US for a very long time. And they do that so they build everything in-house that they possibly can. And in fact, when they lost a rocket, it was because of one rare component that came from somebody else, one of their rockets. So
That's what they said.
is that also true of Tesla? Is that also true of Tesla? And does it give them a business advantage to use that model?
Yeah.
Ashlee Vance.
Well, I mean, it is true of Tesla to a large degree. Certainly, they have to buy, parts from automotive suppliers. But since day one, I mean, when they first started, they did not want to be vertically integrated. They were trying to sort of do this as low cost as they could. As time went on, Tesla started building more and more bits of the car until it was building most of the car. Certainly on pieces like the software, they see this as an enormous advantage over the competition, that they make this in-house, that it's really tightly integrated with the car. Elon does the same thing at SpaceX and Tesla, or very similar things where, he sort of has computer scientists and engineers out on the factory floor where they have to work with the welders and people making all of these products. And so most other companies separate this stuff usually into different states. And so, Elon has everybody in the same factory working together.
We're going to go to our lightning round and ask some brief questions of our guests. So first, for Ashlee Vance, the number of times you looked nervously over your shoulder while walking alone at night while you were writing the biography of Elon Musk.
It was mostly after the book came out that the nerves really kicked in.
Number of hours Musk budgets into his week for his romantic partner.
10 hours.
Take note. Ashlee, if you could, Peter Henderson, if you could have any new car for free, which would you choose?
Well, I'd like to try the Model 3 now.
I do Model X.
Just starting, yours?
Model X.
Model X.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to see that before anyone else gets it. That's a good story.
Ashlee Vance, what are the odds that Elon Musk has a mole in our live audience today watching us right now?
I would say minimal. I don't know if Elon, he's doing his thing.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Greg Dalton. We'll see you next time, everybody.